Why would an 86-year-old widow be accused of cheating a will when the will left her almost nothing? That was the question. Sitting in the parlor of the Whitcomb house on the afternoon, Clara Whitcomb watched her late husband's children divide his life into piles. The good silver went into one list. The framed fishing photograph went into another. The lake account, the truck, the tool chest, and the small rental house were spoken of in careful voices. And then the family attorney cleared his throat and read the sentence that made Clara's stepson laugh without smiling. To my wife, Clara, I leave my old Bible. That was all. Clara did not move. She was 86 years old, narrow in the shoulders. With white hair pinned at the back of her head and a black dress, she had altered herself because grief had made her thinner. Beside her chair sat Major, her German shepherd, gray around the muzzle and broad through the chest. He had been Daniel Whitcomb's dog first, then Clara's shadow after Daniel's stroke. Major lifted his head when the laughter came. Not because he understood money, but because he understood the sound of people turning on the woman he had been trained to protect. Clara looked at her. "What is the Bible?" Marlene said. He was too weak to sign anything near the end. But somehow you ended up with the one thing he kept beside him every night. Clara's hand found Major's collar before it found the arm of the chair. The leather was warm from the dog's body. "Your father wanted me to have it." Marlene smiled with the kind of patience that cuts deeper than anger. "Of course he did. After you kept everyone away from him." The words struck the room harder than any slap. Clara had heard whispers before the funeral. She had heard that Daniel's second wife had controlled the house, managed the medicine, answered the phone, and made herself necessary. No one mentioned that Daniel had needed help turning in bed, that he shook when strangers raised their voices, that he forgot dates but remembered hymns. No one mentioned the nights Clara slept in a chair because he was afraid of waking alone. Marlene turned on him. Years before, and yet she gets the Bible he kept changing his notes in. "I do not know about notes, Mr. Bell said. I can only read what is here." Thomas crossed the room to the side table where the Bible lay. It was large, black, and worn soft at the corners. Clara had wiped medicine spills from its cover. She had placed his reading glasses on top of it every evening. She had not opened it since the day he stopped breathing. Thomas reached for it. Major stood. He did not bark. He stepped between Thomas and the table, his body straight, his head low, his eyes fixed on the hand moving toward the Bible. Daniel had taught Major to stay near the Bible during his worst months because that was where he kept the call bell, his glasses, and the folded prayer card Clara read when he could not sleep. "Call off the dog," Thomas snapped. Clara looked at Major. "Easy." Major did not move away. He only stopped leaning forward. His paws stayed planted. Marlene gave a small, bitter laugh. "Now the dog guards the evidence." "It is not evidence," Clara said. "Then let Thomas pick it up." Clara swallowed. She wanted to say that she had never asked for the rental house, never asked for the truck, never asked for Daniel's children to love her. She wanted to say that she had loved their father when loving him meant changing sheets, grinding pills into applesauce, and listening to him apologize for needing help. But people who have already named you a thief rarely hear the inventory of care. She stood slowly. Her knees protested. Major felt the change in her balance and shifted his weight toward her without taking his eyes from Thomas. "I will pick it up," Clara said. The attorney nodded once. "That may be best." Marlene folded her arms. "Fine. Open it here." The demand carried the accusation openly now. Clara, the second wife. Clara, the gatekeeper. Clara, who must have hidden something. Clara who, in their minds, had become the reason their father's dying years felt too far away from them. Clara reached for the Bible. Major stepped aside only when her hand touched the cover. The leather was cracked near the spine, and one corner had been repaired with black tape years ago. It smelled faintly of Daniel's aftershave and the cedar drawer where he had once kept church programs. Clara held it against her chest for one breath, then lowered it to the coffee table. When she opened the front cover, a folded church bulletin slid out. Nothing more. Marlene's mouth tightened as if disappointment had arrived before proof. Clara turned the first pages. Births. Marriages. Deaths. Daniel's first wife. Ruth. Written in blue ink. Their children. Later. In Daniel's hand. Clara May Ellis married Daniel Whitcomb. The date was there. Not large. Not decorated. But written by him. Thomas looked away. Marlene said, "A marriage line does not prove you did not pressure him." Clara placed one palm flat on the page. "I never needed proof that I was his wife." "Maybe you did," Marlene said. The attorney began to speak, but Major made a low sound from his chest. He was not looking at Marlene now. He was looking at the Bible's back cover. His ears had tipped forward. His nose moved once, twice, toward the taped corner. Clara followed his gaze. She had noticed that corner years ago but never questioned it. Daniel had repaired things badly after his hands began shaking. Tape on covers. Twine on handles. A rubber band around the remote. But Major had been near that Bible every night. He knew its smells. Its page. Its ordinary weight. Now he was staring at the back cover as if something there had changed. "What is it?" "Boy," Clara whispered. Major pressed his nose against the taped corner and exhaled. Thomas scoffed. "This is ridiculous." "But Mr. Bell leaned closer. "Mrs. Whitcomb." "May I see that corner?" Clara did not hand the Bible to him. She turned it carefully, keeping it on the table. The tape had lifted along one edge. Not newly, but enough to show a line beneath the coverboard. It was not paper. It was a folded strip of hospital wristband plastic. Flattened and tucked where no bookmark belonged, Marlene stepped forward. "What is that?" Clara's fingers trembled too much to pull it free. She looked at the attorney. "You may help, but do not tear it." "Mr." Bell used the edge of a letter opener and eased the strip out slowly. With it came a small folded paper, brittle at the crease, and a hospital visitor label with Clara's name printed clearly beside Daniel's room number. The parlor went still. The will had not given Clara money. It had given her the one object Daniel trusted to hold what the family had refused to see. Major lowered himself beside Clara's chair, his head resting on her shoe, while the little hospital label lay on the Bible page like the first witness willing to speak. If Clara had kept everyone away from Daniel, why was her name the one printed on every hospital visitor label? The small strip of paper lay across the Bible page, thin as a receipt, but it changed the weight of the parlor. Marlene stared at it with her lips pressed together. Thomas leaned closer, then looked away as if the label had embarrassed him. "Mr." Bell adjusted his glasses and read the room number aloud. Not loudly, only clearly enough that no one could pretend the paper was blank. Clara did not reach for it at first. Her hands rested on her lap, one over the other, the knuckles pale beneath the skin. Major stayed beside her shoe. His head was lowered, but his eyes watched each person in turn. He had known hospitals by smell. Disinfectant on Clara's coat, plastic wristbands, the sharp scent of fear that stayed in a house after bad news came home. When Daniel was alive, Major slept outside the bedroom door and rose every time Clara rose. Marlene recovered first. "A visitor label proves you visited him," she said. "It does not prove what you told him or what you kept from us." Clara lifted her eyes. "I never kept you from your father. You told us he was resting, because he was. You told us not to come late, because late visits made him tremble until morning." Thomas shifted uncomfortably. "Marlene, maybe we should slow down." Clara almost smiled at that word. Slow. No one had wanted to move slowly when they were sorting the truck. The rental house. The accounts. The fishing gear. The things that could be appraised. But now, with one paper label on a Bible page, they wanted caution. She looked at the Bible. "Your father did not leave me this because it was valuable. He left it because it knew who had been in the room." No one answered. Major's ear twitched at the word room. Daniel's last years had been made of rooms. The bedroom with the hospital bed. The downstairs bathroom with the grab bar Clara had paid to install from her own savings. The kitchen where she cut his pills and marked his water glass with tape so he would drink enough. The clinic room where he was weighed without shoes. The hospital room where he woke frightened if he did not see her chair by the window. Clara had been a seamstress before she married Daniel. Not famous. Not wealthy. Just good. She altered wedding dresses, hemmed school uniforms, repaired suit jackets, and took in curtains for women who wanted old homes to look new. After Daniel's stroke, she still kept a small sewing table near the window. But her work changed. She replaced buttons one-handed while listening for his bell. She stitched Velcro into his shirts when his fingers stopped obeying him. She shortened pajama sleeves so the cuffs would not catch on the bed rail. People called that care. They forgot it was labor. Daniel's children had visited at first with flowers, then with casseroles, then with excuses. Clara had not judged them aloud. Marlene lived 2 towns away and had a husband with heart trouble. Thomas worked rotating shifts. Their younger brother, Paul, sent checks when he remembered. Life was never simple, but grief had a way of rewriting absence into accusation. After Daniel died, the children spoke as if Clara had stood at the door with a lock, when more often she had stood there with a clean towel, asking them to wash their hands because Daniel's immune system was weak. Mr. Bell unfolded the brittle paper that had come out with the label. "This appears to be a visitor log copy," he said. Marlene reached for it. Major lifted his head. Clara placed one hand over the paper before Marlene touched it. "Let him read it." The attorney cleared his throat. "It lists dates, room number, visitor name, relation, Clara Whitcomb, wife, repeated entries." He paused. "There are also notes in the margin. They appear to be in Daniel's handwriting." Thomas frowned. Dad wrote on a hospital log. Clara closed her eyes. She remembered now. One winter admission. Daniel had become angry because a nurse wrote Clara as caregiver instead of wife on a temporary note. He had insisted on a pen. His hand had shook so badly that Clara tried to stop him. He told her, "No, they need to write you right." Mr. Bell read one margin note softly. Clara stayed overnight when family could not travel. Marlene's face hardened. Not because the note was false, but because it was difficult to hate. Clara reached for the Bible and turned the back cover toward herself. The taped corner had opened into a pocket. Not a clever hiding place. A desperate one. A place made by a sick man with shaking hands and a dog trained to notice when anything near the bed changed. Inside the loosened cover, she could see the edge of something else. But she did not pull it out yet. The room had not earned everything at once. Major sniffed the Bible again, then looked toward the hallway. "What is it?" Thomas asked before he could stop himself. Clara followed Major's gaze. The hallway led to Daniel's downstairs bedroom, still mostly untouched since the funeral. Marlene had wanted to clear it that week. Clara had said not yet. Marlene had called that control too. Major stood and walked to the hallway. He stopped at the bedroom door and looked back. Marlene gave a bitter little breath. "Now we are following the dog again." Clara rose slowly. Her knees hurt. Her black dress pulled at the shoulder where she had taken it in too quickly the night before the service. Major waited until she had her balance. Thomas stepped toward her, then stopped, unsure whether help would be welcome. "You may bring the Bible," Clara said to Mr. Bell, "but it stays in my sight." The attorney nodded. Daniel's room smelled faintly of cedar, clean cotton, and the medicated lotion Clara had rubbed into his hands when the skin cracked. The hospital bed had been removed, but the marks remained on the floor. A small table sat by the window. On it were Daniel's glasses, a water coaster, a brass reading lamp, and the little wooden tray where Clara used to place the Bible each night. Major went straight to the tray. He sniffed the empty surface, then lowered his nose to the drawer beneath it. The drawer was stuck. Clara knew it had swollen in damp weather. She had meant to fix it after the funeral, then found she could not touch the room for more than a few minutes at a time. Thomas crouched. "May I?" Clara nodded. Gently. He pulled once. The drawer held. Major pressed his nose under the drawer lip and gave a low huff. Thomas tried again, this time lifting slightly. The drawer opened with a dry scrape. Inside were ordinary things. a nail file, cough drops, a pencil worn short, a prayer card, 2 batteries, a folded handkerchief. Then Major pushed his nose past the handkerchief and nosed up a small white envelope, yellowed at the flap. On the front, in Daniel's unsteady handwriting, were the words, "For the day they forget, Clara was here." Thomas stopped breathing for a second. Marlene stood in the doorway, silent now. Clara did not cry. Not yet. Tears would have made the others feel forgiven too quickly. She took the envelope from Thomas, and Major sat beside her, as if he had finished only the first part of a duty Daniel had left him. Inside was not money. It was not a new will. It was a small stack of hospital parking receipts, a medication schedule written in Clara's hand, and a note from Daniel that began with one sentence no accusation could soften. "She did not keep you from me. She kept me alive long enough to say goodbye." What kind of goodbye needs to be hidden in a bedside drawer after the funeral is already over? Clara held Daniel's note in both hands, while the old bedroom seemed to shrink around her. The words were simple. "She did not keep you from me. She kept me alive long enough to say goodbye." They were not legal words. They did not divide property. They did not answer the family's hunger for certainty. But they did something more painful. They answered the accusation that had been standing between Clara and the door since Daniel died. Marlene remained in the hallway, one hand on the frame, as if crossing the threshold would make the note harder to deny. Thomas stood beside the small table with his head bowed. "Mr." Bell held the Bible carefully against his coat. Major sat so close to Clara that his shoulder pressed against her calf. The dog's breathing was the only steady sound in the room. Marlene spoke first. "He was medicated when he wrote that." Clara did not look at her. "He was in pain when he wrote many things. That does not mean he was not himself. You do not know when he wrote it." Clara turned the note over. On the back, Daniel had written a date. Beneath it was a room number. The same room number printed on the visitor label tucked in the Bible. "Mr." Bell leaned closer and confirmed it softly. Marlene's face changed. Not into remorse, but into the panic of someone losing the shape of a story she had repeated too many times. "A note still does not explain why we were not called the night before he died." Clara looked up then. "You were called." "No, I was not. I left messages." Thomas lifted his head. "I got one." Marlene turned toward him. "You never told me that." "I thought you knew," he said. "I did not." The room opened into another silence, deeper than the last. Clara remembered that night in pieces, Daniel's hand hot in hers, the nurse asking about family, the hallway vending machine humming, Clara's phone pressed against her ear while she called each child. Thomas had answered on the second ring. Paul's number had gone to voicemail. Marlene's had rung and rung, then clicked over. Clara had left a message. She remembered because Daniel had asked, "Did you tell Marlene not to drive if she was crying?" Clara had said yes, even though she had not. She had only managed, "Please come if you can. He is asking for you." Marlene shook her head. There was no message. Major stood. He had been still through grief, still through insult, still through the bedside drawer. But when Marlene said there was no message, the dog turned away from the bed and walked to Daniel's closet. Clara watched him. Major. The closet door was open a few inches. Inside hung 2 of Daniel's old shirts, a cardigan, and the navy robe he wore during his last months at home. Major pushed the door wider with his nose and stepped in halfway. He did not sniff the shoes. He did not nose the shirts. He reached for the robe's lower pocket and tugged. Thomas moved first. "Wait." Major released the robe and sat, eyes fixed on the pocket. Clara closed her fingers around Daniel's note. Her heart had begun to beat too hard again. "Bring the robe here." Thomas lifted it from the hook. The robe sagged in his hands, empty and worn, with one sleeve folded inside itself. Clara had washed that robe so many times the fabric had lost its navy and become the color of dusk. Daniel used to keep tissues in one pocket, peppermint lozenges in the other, and a small voice recorder in the lower pocket when his handwriting became too difficult. Clara saw the shape before Thomas did. "Check the lower pocket," she said. Marlene stepped into the room. "What is happening?" Thomas reached into the pocket and drew out a small silver recorder, the kind Daniel had bought years earlier to record church committee notes and fishing reminders. A strip of masking tape across the back said "Hospital Night" in Daniel's hand. Clara gripped the edge of the table. The recorder had been missing since the funeral. She had assumed it had been packed with his things. Major had known the robe. He had known Daniel's scent. He had known the pocket where the little machine had clicked and hummed while Daniel rested. Marlene stared at it. "That proves nothing." Thomas looked at her, then let it play. The batteries were dead. For a moment, the old accusation tried to return. Clara felt it in the way Marlene straightened, the way certainty began to gather around inconvenience. "But Mr." Bell removed 2 batteries from the bedside drawer, checked them, and said, "These may still work." They did. The recorder clicked, scratched, then filled the room with Daniel Whitcomb's thin, tired voice. "Clara told me she called all 3 of you. I asked her to. If you hear this, do not let grief make a liar out of the woman who stayed." No one moved. The recording caught his breath, the faint beep of a hospital monitor, and Clara's voice in the background saying, "Save your strength, Daniel." Then Daniel spoke again, slower. "Marlene, if you are angry when I am gone, be angry at sickness. Be angry at time. Do not be angry at Clara because she learned the hard parts of loving me." The sound cut out for a second, then returned with static. It was not dramatic. It was not clean. It sounded like a sick man using the little strength he had to place one stone in the path of a future lie. Marlene's hand covered her mouth. Thomas turned away. Clara did not cry. She listened. Daniel continued, "I left her the Bible because the Bible holds the notes I could not trust myself to mail. It holds what I wanted remembered. She did not ask me for money. She asked me to drink water, take pills, and forgive myself when I was cruel from pain." Major lowered himself beside the robe and put his head on its hem. The recorder stopped after a long breath. "Mr." Bell looked at the device in his hand as if it weighed far more than it did. Marlene whispered, "Why would he hide that?" Clara answered without bitterness. "Because he knew you would need proof before you would believe care." The sentence broke something in the room, but not loudly. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed. Marlene gripped the closet door. The attorney placed the Bible on the table beside the note, the visitor label, and the recorder. None of it changed the will. None of it made Clara rich. But every item made the accusation smaller. Major sniffed the robe again, then pushed his nose beneath the folded sleeve. Something paper-thin slipped out and landed on the floor. Thomas picked it up. It was a small card from the hospital chapel, folded in half. On the inside, Daniel had written one more instruction: "If the recorder is found, look inside the Bible's back cover." I left Clara the truth in order. Clara looked at the Bible. The taped corner had already given them one label, one visitor log copy, and the first witness. But Daniel had written the truth in order, and Major had only brought them to the next step. The room did not clear after the recording. It tightened around the Bible, because the back cover still held something no one had opened. If Daniel had left the truth in order, what was still hidden inside the Bible he gave to the woman they accused? Clara stood beside the small bedside table, while the afternoon light thinned across Daniel's room. The silver recorder lay near the hospital chapel card. The visitor label lay beneath Mr. Bell's careful fingers. The Bible waited at the center of the table, black cover worn smooth by years of hands. Prayer, illness, and the small routines no one had counted as love until proof forced them to look. Marlene had not sat down. She stood near the closet with one hand against Daniel's navy robe, as if touching it might bring back the father she wanted, and not the man who had just spoken from a recorder. Thomas stood beside the bed, shoulders rounded, eyes fixed on the Bible. Clara knew that look. She had seen it on children in her school bus mirror when they realized the story they told about another child had gone too far. Major lifted his head from the hem of the robe. He rose slowly, walked back to the table, and pressed his nose near the loosened back cover. He did not paw at it. He did not push. He waited for Clara. That was what Daniel had trained him to do during the illness. Major could fetch slippers, alert Clara when Daniel tried to stand too quickly, and lie beside the bed through restless nights. But his most useful command was not a trick. It was patience. He knew when to stop a hand, when to call attention, and when to let Clara decide. Mr. Bell looked at Clara. Mrs. Whitcomb, would you like me to open the back cover further? Clara rested her palm on the Bible. Slowly, Marlene drew a sharp breath. Should we be doing this without documenting it? The attorney nodded. That is a fair concern. I will take photographs before anything is removed. Clara was grateful for that. Not because she wanted a legal spectacle, but because she had already learned what happened when memory had to fight against convenience. Mr. Bell used his phone to photograph the Bible, the taped corner, the visitor label, the chapel card, and the recorder. Then he put on a pair of thin gloves from his briefcase. Clara noticed the care. After weeks of being treated as if her hands were the danger, it mattered to see someone handle Daniel's things as if they deserved respect. The back cover had separated from the board just enough to make a narrow pocket. Mr. Bell eased the tape up along the old repair line. The sound was small, sticky, almost embarrassing in the quiet room. Inside, tucked flat against the cover, was a folded sheet of lined paper, a second hospital label, and a small cream envelope sealed only by age. Thomas whispered. Dad did all that. Clara looked at Daniel's crooked tape. Your father did more than people thought when they stopped giving him time. Mr. Bell unfolded the lined paper first. The handwriting was Daniel's, but weaker than the notes in the family pages. Some letters leaned into others. Some words had been written twice, as if his hand had lost the path and found it again. The attorney read the first line silently, then looked at Clara. It is addressed to you. Clara took the paper only after Mr. Bell placed it on the table. She did not lift it to her chest. She wanted everyone to see that Daniel's words were not being swallowed by her grief. She read aloud because the room had accused aloud. Clara, if this reaches you, then I failed to say enough while I was living. I was not always easy to care for. Pain made me small. Fear made me mean. You stayed anyway. Her voice shook on the last sentence. Major pressed his body against her knee. She let the weight steady her before she continued. I do not leave you the Bible because I think my children will understand it. I leave it because this is where I put what they may need to understand you. Thomas covered his eyes. Marlene said nothing. Clara read the rest more slowly. Daniel wrote that Clara had never asked him to change the old will. She had never asked for the truck, the rental house, or the accounts he had promised to divide among his children years before. He wrote that she had asked only for two things near the end: that Major not be taken from the house while she was still living there, and that no one call her a stranger in the room where she had slept in a chair more nights than she slept in a bed. Clara stopped reading, not because the letter ended, but because the word stranger had reached a place inside her that had been bruised for years. Marlene's voice came out smaller than before. I never called you a stranger. No, Clara said. You called me something worse. You called me the reason you stayed away. Marlene flinched. Thomas looked at his sister. We did say that. Marlene turned on him. You let me say it. Yes, Thomas said. I did. Major looked from one to the other, ears forward, as if listening to a different kind of command. Mr. Bell placed the second hospital label beside the first. This one had Daniel's name, the same room number, and a printed date from the night before he died. On the back, in Clara's handwriting, was a list of phone numbers with check marks beside them. Thomas, Paul, Marlena, nurse desk, Pastor Glenn. Beside Marlene's number, Clara had written, left message. He asked for her. Marlene stepped closer. That could have been written later. Clara closed her eyes. The accusation came automatically now. Like a habit Marlene had not yet learned to stop. Yes, Clara said quietly. It could have been, if I were what you needed me to be. Mr. Bell lifted the cream envelope. There may be another way to verify the date. Inside the envelope were 2 items. One was a hospital parking receipt printed with the same date and an evening time. The other was a folded note on hospital stationery signed by a nurse named Adele Martin. Mr. Bell read it carefully. Mrs. Whitcomb stayed overnight at Mr. Whitcomb's request. Family calls were made from the room phone and from Mrs. Whitcomb's cell phone. Patient became calmer after calls were placed. The room seemed to breathe differently. Thomas sat down on the bed. I remember you calling. I was at work. I told myself I would come after my shift. Clara did not rescue him from that memory. You came the next afternoon. He was already gone. Yes. Marlene's eyes had filled. But tears did not erase what she had said. Clara knew that. Tears often arrived only after evidence made denial too heavy to carry. Mr. Bell put the nurse note with the visitor labels. This does not change the distribution in the will, but it is a clear contemporaneous note. It supports that calls were made, that Mrs. Whitcomb was present, and that Mr. Whitcomb identified her as his wife and caregiver. Clara appreciated the careful words. He was not pretending to rule the past. He was placing supports beneath a truth that had been left to sag. Major sniffed the cream envelope once more. Then he nudged the Bible pages with his nose, turning them clumsily until they fell open near the family record section. Clara reached to steady the thin paper. Something small slipped from between 2 pages and landed against her sleeve. It was Daniel's wedding ring, not the good ring the funeral home had returned in a velvet pouch. This was the old gold band he had stopped wearing after his fingers swelled. Clara recognized the tiny scratch across the inside edge from the year he caught it on the dock ladder. Tied through it was a narrow piece of thread, and attached to the thread was a folded note, no larger than a postage stamp. Thomas leaned forward. Marlene covered her mouth again. Clara unfolded the note with the tip of her finger. Daniel had written only 6 words. She was my wife. Say it. No one in the room moved toward the property lists. No one spoke about the truck, the silver, or the rental house. The old Bible had not made Clara wealthy. It had done something Daniel's will had failed to do in plain language. It had placed her name back inside the marriage his children had tried to edit. Major lowered himself at Clara's feet, no longer guarding the Bible from their hands, but keeping his body between Clara and the silence that followed. The Bible had given them the letter, the nurse note, the ring, and one command Daniel could no longer speak. Now the family had to decide whether they would obey it. What happens when a dead man's last command is simple, but the living are too proud to say it? Clara stood beside Daniel's bed with the old wedding ring in her palm and the Bible open on the table. 6 words lay in front of Daniel's children like a locked door with the key already in it. She was my wife. Say it. The sentence did not ask them to love Clara. It did not ask them to give her the house, the truck, or $1 more than the will allowed. It asked them to stop making her a trespasser in the story of her own marriage. Thomas was the first to look at her directly. His face had lost the hard shape it wore in the parlor. Clara, he said, and then stopped, as if her name had become heavier. Marlene wiped under one eye with the side of her finger. Dad wrote that when he was upset. Major lifted his head. Clara looked down at the dog, then back at Marlene. Your father wrote many things when he was upset. You kept the ones that proved he loved you. You questioned the ones that proved he loved me. Marlene's mouth opened, but no answer came. Mr. Bell placed the ring note beside the nurse's statement. The visitor labels, the hospital parking receipt, Daniel's letter, the chapel card, and the recorder. He did not stack them. He laid each item apart, so every witness had its own space. The table looked less like a bedside table now, and more like a quiet hearing no court had called. This material should be preserved, he said. It may not alter the will, but it is relevant to the family's understanding of Mr. Daughter Whitcomb's intent regarding Mrs. Whitcomb's dignity and care. Marlene turned toward him. Kade, Mr. Bell paused. There may be practical matters in the estate and household that require review, but I am speaking plainly now. Your father anticipated that Mrs. Whitcomb would be accused. He left several forms of evidence in the Bible to answer that accusation. Thomas sat on the edge of the bed. And we accused her anyway. Clara closed the wedding ring into her palm. It left a small, round pressure against her skin. Daniel's good ring had gone with the funeral home. This old one. The swollen finger ring. The dock ladder ring. The one he had kept after he could no longer wear it. Had been hidden for her to find, after the children had said what grief made them brave enough to say and ashamed enough to deny. Marlene looked toward the hallway. We should go back to the parlor. No, Clara said. The word surprised everyone, including her. She set the ring on top of the Bible. You made your accusation in the parlor with everyone sitting upright and polite. But your father lived the truth in this room. We will finish here. Thomas nodded once. Marlene stared at the floor. Clara took the chair beside the window. The same chair where she had spent so many nights watching Daniel sleep in small, broken stretches. The cushion still held the hollow of her old body. No one had noticed that. People noticed valuables. They missed evidence shaped like endurance. Major came to her side and put his head beneath her hand. The room had been Daniel's sick room, but it had also been Clara's workplace. On the dresser lay the folded cloths she used to protect his skin from the bed rail. In the basket near the chair were the socks she had altered so the seams would not rub his toes. A narrow notebook sat beneath the lamp, its cardboard cover soft from use. Clara saw Thomas notice it. What is that? He asked. My care notebook, Clara said. Marlene's shoulders tightened. You kept records. I kept him alive. Thomas reached toward the notebook, then stopped. May I? Clara appreciated the question more than he knew. Yes. The notebook opened to pages of small, plain entries. Morning pills, evening pills, water intake, blood pressure. Nights, he was restless. Days he asked for Marlene. Days he asked for Thomas. Days he asked Clara to read Psalm 23 because he could not find the line himself. There were no dramatic words, no accusation, just proof of a life reduced to care and a woman who kept showing up. Thomas turned one page, then another. You wrote when he asked for us. Yes. Why didn't you send this? Clara leaned back. Because I thought being asked should have been enough. Marlene whispered. I did come. You did, Clara said. And he was glad when you came. But you came less often than you now remember. The sentence was not cruel. That made it harder. Marlene took the notebook from Thomas and scanned a page. Her eyes stopped at a line Clara knew well. Marlene called. Daniel asleep. Told her morning would be better. Daniel woke later and asked if she sounded angry. Reassured him. Marlene's fingers shook. I thought you didn't want me there. I wanted him calm, Clara said. Sometimes that meant asking people to come earlier. Sometimes it meant asking them not to argue beside his bed. It never meant I wanted him lonely. Major shifted. His paw brushed the Bible stand beneath the small table. The wooden stand rocked, and something slid from its underside to the rug. It was a tan envelope, taped flat beneath the stand where the Bible had rested every night. Thomas bent and picked it up. There's more. Marlene looked almost afraid now. How many things did he hide? Clara's eyes stayed on the envelope. Enough to be believed by people who did not want to believe me. The envelope was addressed in Daniel's hand to Pastor Glenn. Do not mail unless Clara is challenged. Mr. Bell photographed it before opening. Inside was a letter. Not to Clara and not to the children, but to the pastor who had visited Daniel twice a week during his final months. Mr. Bell, read the first lines. Glenn, if Clara is blamed after I am gone, remind them that you saw who sat with me when I was afraid. Clara closed her eyes. Pastor Glenn, the second outside witness. Daniel had not trusted only family pages and hospital scraps. He had left a line leading beyond the house, beyond children defending their own pain, beyond Clara being forced to plead for her own name. Thomas stood. We should call him, Marlene said. Now Clara opened her eyes. Now, Mr. Bell made the call from Daniel's room. Pastor Glenn answered on the third ring, his voice older and softer than Clara remembered. When Mr. Belle explained. The pastor did not hesitate. Clara was there, he said. Every visit. Sometimes Daniel was kind. Sometimes he was ashamed of needing so much. She never answered harshness with humiliation. He called her his wife. He corrected me once when I called her caregiver first. He said, "Pastor, caregiver is what she does. Wife is who she is." Marlene turned away from the bed. Thomas put a hand over his mouth. The pastor continued. Daniel worried his children would turn grief toward the safest target. I told him not to borrow trouble. He said he had borrowed enough trouble in life and knew the sound of it coming. Clara looked at the Bible. Daniel, who had been proud, difficult, tender in private, and stubborn to the end, had known his children better than she had wanted to believe. Pastor Glenn offered to write a statement about his visits and Daniel's words. Mr. Bell thanked him. Clara thanked him too. But her voice was small. Major pressed against her knee until she could breathe evenly again. When the call ended, the room no longer belonged to accusation. It belonged to witnesses. The Bible had opened to hospital labels. The drawer had opened to notes. The robe had opened to the recorder. The stand had opened to the pastor's letter. Each piece did not make Clara richer. Each piece made the lie poorer. Marlene finally looked at Clara. I thought you wanted to replace my mother. Clara's hand closed on Major's collar. There it was. The older wound beneath the newer accusation. Not the Bible. Not the will. Ruth, Daniel's first wife, whose name still lived in the front pages. Clara had never tried to remove it. She had dusted the frame that held Ruth's photograph because Daniel could not reach it. I never replaced her, Clara said. I came after her. That is not the same thing. Marlene's face broke then. Not into apology yet, but into the first honest shape of grief. Major left Clara's side, walked to the Bible, and lay down with his chin near Daniel's ring. The dog was no longer blocking anyone's hand. He was marking the place where the next truth had to be spoken aloud. The pastor had said wife. Daniel had written wife. The hospital had printed wife. The Bible had held wife. Now the only people left to say it were the children who had refused. Why is the hardest word in a grieving family sometimes the name, a dying man? Asked them to say. Clara sat by the window in Daniel's room, with Major's head resting near the Bible stand. While the evidence lay around them in careful pieces, the hospital labels said wife. Daniel's letter said wife. Pastor Glenn's voice over the phone had said wife. Even the old wedding ring, scratched and too small for Daniel's swollen hand, seemed to say the word without sound, but Marlene still stood with her arms crossed, looking at the floor, as if the floor had been the one making accusations all afternoon. Thomas looked at his sister first. Marlena, don't, she said. No, we have to. She turned toward him. You want to fix this in 1 minute because you feel guilty. I do feel guilty. Good for you. Clara did not interrupt. She had spent too many years smoothing rooms so Daniel would not become upset, so the children would not leave angry, so visits would end without shouting. Age had taken some things from her, but it had given her one permission she had not expected. She no longer had to rescue other people from the sound of their own truth. Mr. Bell collected the papers into separate clear sleeves from his briefcase. He did not rush. I will need to make copies of these items for the estate file, he said. Mrs. Whitcomb, the originals should remain with you unless a formal review requires otherwise. Marlene looked up sharply. With her, Clara turned her head slowly. Yes, with me. They belong to Dad. They came to me through the Bible he left me. They concern all of us. Clara nodded. Then all of you may have copies. Marlene's voice tightened. And what if something disappears? Major lifted his head. Thomas said. Marlena. But Clara raised one thin hand. Let her finish. She has been accusing me in pieces. She may as well say the whole thing. Marlene's eyes filled again. But this time anger held the tears in place. I don't know what to trust anymore. Clara looked at the Bible, at the taped back cover, at Daniel's crooked repairs. Then begin by trusting what your father made harder to deny than my voice. The sentence settled over Daniel's room. Outside, wind moved through the maple near the driveway. Somewhere in the parlor, a plate shifted in a cabinet with the small sound old houses make when they are tired of holding their breath. Thomas sat beside the care notebook. He turned another page, then stopped. There's a date here. The day I came and left after 10 minutes. Clara remembered. Daniel had been embarrassed because his hands shook while Thomas watched him eat. Thomas had spoken too loudly. Trying to be cheerful, Daniel had snapped at him. Thomas had left hurt. He was ashamed. Clara said, I thought he didn't want me there. He wanted you. He did not want you to see what illness had done to him. Thomas pressed his fingers to his eyes. I should have come back. Yes, Clara said. He looked at her, surprised by the directness. Clara's voice stayed soft. You should have. There was no cruelty in it, only the absence of lying. Thomas nodded as if the words had struck him and steadied him at the same time. Marlene moved toward the doorway. I need air. Major stood before she reached the hall. He did not block her. He simply followed 2 steps, then stopped by the dresser. His nose lifted toward the top drawer, the one Clara had not opened since the funeral, because it held Daniel's folded handkerchiefs and the last cardigan he had worn to church. Marlene stopped too. What now? Clara looked at Major. The dog's tail was still. His ears were forward, but not tense. He had that same focused quiet he had shown near the Bible's back cover. Something familiar was where it should not have been. Open the drawer, Clara said. Marlene laughed once, but there was fear in it now. Of course. Let the dog accuse me too. No one said accuse, Thomas said. Clara looked at her. Major does not know how to accuse. He knows how to notice. The drawer stuck slightly. Thomas opened it with care. Inside were handkerchiefs, 2 cardigans, a small bottle of aftershave, and a stack of greeting cards tied with blue ribbon. On top lay a photograph of Daniel, with all 3 children from years before Clara married him. Ruth, his first wife, stood beside him in a pale coat, smiling into the sun. Clara reached out and touched the edge of the photograph. Your mother looked beautiful that day. Marlene's face changed. It was the first time Clara had said Ruth without the room tightening. Major pushed his nose gently beneath the stack of cards. A sealed envelope slid forward. It was addressed not to Clara, but to Marlene. Marlene did not take it. Thomas picked it up and read the front. For Marlena. If she blames Clara for what time took. The room went very still. Marlene's mouth trembled. No. Clara closed her eyes. Daniel had known. Not only the accusation, but its root. Marlene's grief had needed a person to stand where death should have stood. And Clara had been available. Mr. Bell photographed the envelope before handing it to Marlene. You do not have to read it aloud. Marlene held it as if it might burn her. For several seconds, she did nothing. Then she opened the flap with one shaking finger. Her eyes moved across Daniel's handwriting. The first line made her sit down on the edge of the bed. My girl, Clara did not take your mother's place. I asked her to stand in the place loneliness left open. Marlene covered her mouth. The letters shook in her hands. Clara looked away to give her a privacy. No one had given Clara that afternoon. Marlene kept reading silently. Her shoulders bent inward. Not dramatically, but with the slow collapse of someone who had carried the wrong anger for too long. At the bottom of the page, Daniel had written that Ruth's photograph was never to be removed from the family Bible, and that Clara had been the one who dusted it when he could no longer reach the shelf. He wrote that love after loss was not replacement. It was survival with witnesses. Marlene lowered the letter to her lap. She did not apologize yet. She was still too close to the old story. But when she looked at Clara, the sharpness had gone from her eyes. You dusted my mother's picture every Friday, Clara said. Daniel liked it near the window. Marlene looked at the photograph again. I thought you moved it to make room for your things. No, Clara said. I moved it because the afternoon sun was fading the corner. Your father asked me to protect it. Thomas let out a long breath. We made everything into proof against you. Clara said nothing. The truth did not need her to decorate it. Mr. Bell's phone rang then. He looked at the screen and frowned. It is Paul. Paul, the youngest, had not come to the reading. He had sent instructions through email, asked for copies, and said he trusted Thomas to handle things. He had trusted Thomas to handle what could be sold, not what could be felt. Mr. Bell answered on speaker with Clara's permission. Paul's voice came through clipped and impatient. Are we finished? I heard there's some problem with the Bible. Marlene closed her eyes. Thomas said, Paul, you need to come over. I'm not driving 2 hours for a sentimental argument. Clara felt Major's body stiffen near her knee. She rested one hand on his back. Mr. Bell spoke carefully. Several items have been found in the Bible and in Mr. Clara Whitcomb's room. They concern your father's statements about Mrs. Whitcomb. Paul laughed under his breath. Of course they do. She always knew how to work a room. Major stood. The sound that came from him was low, not loud. But every person in the room felt it. Clara did not correct him at once. Some lines, even an old dog understood, were not simply words. Thomas took the phone. Paul, stop. You are talking about Dad's wife. There it was. Not from Daniel. Not from the pastor. Not printed on a label. From Thomas. Marlene looked up at the word. Paul was silent for a second. What did you just say? Thomas looked at Clara. I said she was Dad's wife. Clara's fingers tightened around Major's collar. She had not known how much she needed one living person in that family to say it until the word entered the room and did not break. Paul muttered something about driving over and hung up. Marlene folded her father's letter and held it against her chest. When Paul gets here, he will make this uglier. Clara looked at the Bible. Then the truth will need to remain calmer than he is. Mr. Bell gathered the documents into the folder but left the Bible open on the table. Major moved back beside it and lay down, his chin inches from Daniel's ring. The first child had said wife. The second had heard it. The third was on his way to test whether the word would hold. Why does one angry son have the power to test a truth his father tried so carefully to protect? Paul arrived just after the porch light came on. Driving too fast up the gravel. Clara heard the sound from Daniel's room and felt Major rise beside her before she moved. The old dog did not bark. He stepped to the doorway, broad chest filling the space, as if he understood that this time the danger would enter carrying the family name. Paul came down the hall with his jacket half-zipped and his work boots wet from the yard. He stopped when he saw Mr. Bell, Thomas, Marlena, Clara, the Bible, the folders, the recorder, and Major in the doorway. What is this? Paul asked. Thomas answered before Clara could. Dad left evidence in the Bible. Paul looked at Clara. Convenient. Major's ears tipped forward. Do not speak to me through that word. Paul gave a short laugh. Dad had a will. Now suddenly there are notes, recordings, pastor letters, hospital scraps, and everybody is supposed to believe you just found them. Mr. Bell stepped between the table and the doorway. Their placement was documented as they were removed. Pastor Glenn has confirmed some details by phone. The hospital note can be checked if records are available. Paul waved a hand. That doesn't change anything. No, Clara said. It changes what you can honestly call me. Paul looked at her. What do you want? More money. Clara's hand found Major's collar. I want what your father asked you to say. Thomas picked up the note tied to Daniel's old wedding ring. His voice was rough when he read it. She was my wife. Say it. Paul stared at the note. Dad was sick. He was dying. Clara said. That is not the same as lying. Paul moved toward the table. Major stepped once, just enough to put his body between Paul's hand and the Bible. Paul stopped. Call him off. Clara did not raise her voice. Step back from the Bible. Thomas stood. Paul. Back up. Paul looked at his brother. You too, Thomas kept his eyes on him. Yes. Me too. Marlene sat on the bed with her father's letter in her lap. She had not said wife yet. Clara knew that. The word was still trapped behind years of jealousy, grief, and the old photograph of Ruth that Clara had dusted every Friday. But Marlene no longer defended Paul's cruelty. That was not healing. But it was a door unlatched. Mr. Bell opened the folder. There is no need to decide everything tonight. These materials can be copied. The hospital note can be checked. Pastor Glenn can provide a written statement. Mrs. Whitcomb is not asking for an immediate legal conclusion. She's asking to be believed, Thomas said. Paul's jaw tightened. I believe Dad cared about her. Fine. That doesn't mean she didn't keep us away. Marlene lifted her head. She called me the night before he died. Paul turned. And you believe that now? I believe Dad wrote that she did. I believe the nurse wrote that calls were made. I believe Thomas got a call. And I believe I missed something because I wanted Clara to be the reason. The room changed again, like a hinge beginning to move after years of rust. Paul looked at her with disbelief. You're folding because of a dog and a stack of old paper. Marlene stood, her father's letter in one hand. No, I am folding because Dad knew exactly what we would do. And he tried to spare her from it. Paul had no answer ready for that. Major moved away from the Bible then. He crossed to Daniel's dresser and sat beneath the framed photograph of Daniel and Ruth. The dog had been drawn to the Bible. The drawer. The robe. The stand. The top drawer. Now he was beneath the photograph. Looking up, Marlene saw it too. What is behind that picture? Clara knew the frame. She had dusted it. She had moved it once away from direct sun. She had never removed the backing. Thomas took it from the dresser and laid it face down on the bed with Clara's permission. The paper backing had a small slit under the cardboard stand. Tucked inside was a folded church program from Daniel's first wife's memorial service. And behind it, a newer envelope, addressed to all my children. Paul crossed his arms. Of course. But his voice had lost some force. Mr. Bell photographed the frame and envelope before opening it. The letter inside was longer than the others. Written before Daniel's illness took more strength from him. Clara looked at Marlene. It is addressed to them. Marlene took the letter. Her voice shook. But she read, My children, if this is found, then you have reached the place where your mother's memory and Clara's place in my life have been forced into the same room. Do not make them fight. Ruth was my first love and the mother of my children. Clara was my wife when age stripped me down to need. One love does not erase the other. If you make Clara pay for Ruth's absence, you will dishonor them both. Marlene stopped. Thomas put a hand over his eyes. Paul looked toward the window. She continued. Slower. Clara never moved Ruth's picture out of jealousy. She moved it because the sun was fading it. She kept Ruth's anniversary flowers on the table because I forgot the date one year and wept from shame. She protected the parts of me you could still respect by carrying the parts I could not bear for you to see. Marlene's voice broke on the last line. The letter ended with Daniel asking them to leave the Bible with Clara, to let Major remain with her as long as she could care for him, and to stop using the word second as if it meant lesser. Marlene lowered the page. The word she had avoided sat in front of her with nowhere left to hide. She looked at Clara. You were his wife. Clara's breath caught once. The word wife spoken by Marlene did not erase the hurt. It placed a first stone over the place where the hurt might one day be buried. Thomas nodded. You were his wife. Paul stared at the floor. Major returned to Clara's side and leaned against her knee. Paul swallowed. I need time. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You may take time. You may not use it to take my name from me. Paul did not answer. But he did not argue. Mr. Bell gathered the new letter with the others. I will prepare a preservation summary. Copies for each of you. Originals with Mrs. Whitcomb, unless directed otherwise. No one objected this time. Major lay down beside the Bible and placed one paw gently over its lower corner, as if reminding them that Daniel's last request was not only about the past, it was also about who would be allowed to stay beside Clara tomorrow. What changes in a house when the person everyone questioned finally stops defending herself? Clara did not answer Paul again that evening. She did not chase him into belief. did not beg Marlene to repeat the word wife, did not ask Thomas whether guilt had made him kind for one night only. She sat in Daniel's room with Major at her feet and watched Mr. Bell place every paper into order. The old Bible remained open on the table, not like a weapon, but like a door Daniel had left unlocked from the other side. The attorney made a simple list before anyone touched another thing. Hospital visitor labels, visitor log copy, Daniel's note from the bedside drawer, parking receipt, Nurse Adele Martin's statement, silver recorder, chapel card, letter to Clara, wedding ring note, care notebook, Pastor Glenn letter, letter to Marlene, letter to all children behind Ruth's photograph. Each item had come from a place connected to Daniel's illness, his marriage, and Major's memory of the room. Paul watched the list with his arms folded. You're making it sound official. Mr. Bell looked at him calmly. I am making it traceable. That word mattered. Traceable. Clara had lived too much of the last 3 years inside feelings people dismissed, because feelings had no staples. Signatures. Or dates. Danielle, sick and frightened, had made a trail. Major, loyal and patient, had followed the parts that still smelled like his person. Now the family could no longer say Clara's story had appeared from grief alone. Thomas asked, what happens next? Mr. Bell closed his folder. Copies. Written statements from Pastor Glenn, if he is willing, and possibly Nurse Martin if she can be reached and remembers the circumstances. I will also note that these items do not appear to alter the existing will as read today. They clarify Mr. Whitcomb's expressed wishes about Mrs. Whitcomb's dignity, the Bible, and Major. Major lifted his head at his name. Marlene looked at the dog. Dad wanted him to stay with her. Clara said, your father knew Major would grieve too. Paul let out a tired breath. No one was taking the dog tonight. No, Clara said. You were only discussing my life as if I had already become temporary. The room went still again. Paul looked toward the hallway. But this time he did not leave. Marlene sat beside Ruth's photograph. The letter from Daniel lay across her lap. I thought if I admitted you were his wife, then I was admitting Mom mattered less. Clara looked at the old photograph. Ruth smiled in sunlight. Young forever, in a way no second wife could compete with, and no widow should have to. Your mother mattered before I ever entered this house. That did not make me nothing. Marlene nodded. But slowly, as if the idea had to travel through years of resistance before it could settle. Thomas stood and picked up the framed photograph. Where was this kept before? On the dresser. Away from the west window. Clara said. Daniel liked to see it when the lamp was on. I moved it after the sunlight began bleaching the corner. Thomas turned the frame over and studied the faded edge of the program hidden behind it. We thought you hid it. You never asked. Those 3 words did not accuse loudly. They simply returned the family to the beginning of every wrong turn. They had guessed. They had accused. They had built a case around silence they never tried to open. Paul rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know what you want from us. Clara looked at him without anger. Start with accuracy. Accuracy. Yes. When you speak of me, use the name your father used. When you speak of this Bible, call it what he left me, not what I stole. When you speak of his last months, say I was there. Not perfect, not holy, there. Paul's face tightened at the word holy, as if he had expected her to perform sainthood and found instead a tired old woman asking only not to be lied about. Marlene folded Daniel's letter carefully. You were there, Thomas said. You were there. Paul looked at the Bible. His voice came low. You were there. Clara felt Major's body relax against her foot. It was not enough. But it was real. Age had taught her not to confuse enough with everything. Mr. Bell suggested they move back to the parlor for signatures acknowledging receipt of copies. Clara rose slowly. Thomas offered his arm. She took it, then looked at him. Do not make my walking into your apology. He gave a small, pained smile. I won't. In the parlor. The piles from the will reading still waited. Silver, photographs, papers, a box of fishing lures, a stack of old church directories. They looked different now. Earlier, each object had seemed to ask who owned Daniel. Now they seemed to ask who had known him enough to keep faith with the truth. Clara placed the Bible on the side table beside her chair. Major lay between the table and the room, not blocking anyone, simply belonging where Daniel had taught him to belong. Mr. Bell wrote a short acknowledgement by hand. It said that the Bible and its contents were received by Clara Whitcomb, according to Daniel Whitcomb's will, that the family had been shown certain personal notes and supporting materials found in the Bible in Daniel's room, that copies would be made, and that no one present would remove the Bible. Major, or the original personal materials from Clara's possession that evening. Paul read it twice. This makes it sound like we threatened her. Clara looked at him. You questioned whether I worked a room before you read your father's words. He had no answer. Thomas signed first. His hand shook. Marlene signed next. She paused over the surname Whitcomb, then looked at Clara. May I write Clara Whitcomb in my copy? Clara's throat tightened. That is my name. Marlene wrote it. Paul took the pen last. For a moment, Clara thought he would refuse. Then Major shifted beside the table. Not toward him, not away from him. Just enough for the old wedding ring note to catch the lamplight. She was my wife. Say it. Paul signed. The signature did not heal him. It did not heal her. It did. However, stop the evening from stealing more than it had already taken. After Mr. Bell left, the family remained in the parlor without knowing how to leave the new truth. Kelly had not come. Paul's children would hear some version of the story later. The estate would still require sorting. The will would still stand unless reviewed through proper channels. Clara did not need anyone pretending the papers made her owner of what she had never requested. Marlene walked to the side table. May I see the Bible? Clara looked at Major. He lifted his head, then settled again. You may sit beside me and look with me. Marlene sat. Together, they opened the front pages. Ruth's name appeared in blue ink. Daniel's children. Birthdays. Baptism dates. Then, later, in Daniel's less steady hand, Clara May Ellis married Daniel Whitcomb. Marlene touched her mother's name first. Then she touched Clara's. I did not know he wrote you in here himself, she said. He did it after church one Sunday. Clara said, he said the family page was not finished if it skipped the woman making his coffee. Marlene laughed through a breath that almost became a sob. Paul stood near the fireplace. Still apart, Thomas looked at the fishing photograph on the mantel. Major rose, took 2 slow steps to the Bible, and placed his muzzle gently on the lower edge of the open page. Clara understood. The dog was not guarding the Bible now. He was asking the family to see what Daniel had put in plain sight before he ever hit a single note. The truth had not begun in the back cover. It had begun in the family record, where Clara's name had been written all along. What does justice look like when it does not change the will, but changes the way a woman is remembered the next morning? Clara woke in the small downstairs bedroom she had moved into after Daniel's hospital bed was removed. For a few seconds, she did not remember the Bible, the letters, the recorder, or the children sitting in the parlor with faces changed by their father's handwriting. She remembered only the ordinary weight of age. Her hip ached. Her fingers were stiff. The house was too quiet in the hour before traffic began outside. Then Major breathed beside the bed. Clara turned her head and saw him lying on the rug with Daniel's old robe tucked under his chin. He had brought it there sometime before dawn. Not to hide it, not to guard it, to keep company with what remained. She sat up slowly. Justice had not made her young. It had not filled the empty side of the bed. It had not changed the will into something grander or made Daniel's children love her without complication. But when she reached for her slippers, she no longer felt as if she had to prove she had belonged in the house before her feet touched the floor. In the kitchen, she fed Major first. Daniel used to tease that the dog had married into better breakfast than most men. Clara measured the food, added warm water, and waited while Major ate. She made toast for herself, took her morning pill, and placed the Bible on the kitchen table beside a yellow notepad. At 9, Thomas arrived with a copy envelope from Mr. Bell. He knocked instead of letting himself in. Clara opened the door. "You have a key." "I know," he said. It did not feel right to use it today. That was not an apology. It was better than one in that moment. It was a changed habit. Marlene came an hour later carrying a cloth bag. Her eyes were swollen from crying. But she did not ask Clara to comfort her. Inside the bag were two things: a new archival sleeve for Daniel's letters and a small bottle of wood polish for Ruth's frame. "I thought the frame should be cleaned," Marlene said. "If you want." Clara studied her. "We can do it together." So they did. They sat at the parlor table with Ruth's photograph between them. Marlene removed the glass. Clara held the corner of the old church program that had hidden Daniel's letter to the children. They cleaned the frame slowly, not speaking much. Major lay beside Clara's chair, eyes half closed. The Bible within reach, but no longer under threat. When the glass was clean, Clara placed Ruth's picture back where Daniel had kept it, away from the harsh west light. Then Marlene picked up the family Bible and turned to the record pages. Her finger paused over her mother's name, then over Clara's. "I told myself there was only room for one woman in this book," Marlene said. Clara looked at the page. "Your father knew better." Marlene nodded. "I am sorry I called you a cheat." Clara let the words sit. A rushed forgiveness would have been another kind of lie. "I am glad you said the right word today." Marlene accepted that. It was the first apology she had given without asking to be released from its cost. Paul came in the afternoon. He stood on the porch for a long time before knocking. Major heard him first and went to the door. Not growling, only watching. Clara opened it herself. Paul held a folded paper. "Pastor Glenn sent his statement to Mr. Bell. I read a copy." Clara waited. Paul looked older than he had the night before. Anger had made him look like Daniel in his hardest years. Shame made him look like the boy Clara had once driven to a baseball field because Daniel's truck would not start. "I was wrong," he said. Clara did not make it easy. "About what?" His throat moved. "About you keeping us away. About the Bible. About what Dad meant to you." "And what did he mean?" Paul looked past her, toward the parlor where Daniel's chair still faced the window. "He meant you were his wife." Major's tail moved once against the floor. Clara stepped aside. "You may come in." They did not become a family in one afternoon. People who have carried resentment for years do not set it down just because evidence grows heavy. Paul still spoke stiffly. Marlene still cried when Ruth's name came up. Thomas still looked at the care notebook as if it were a record of his failures. Clara still felt tired in places no apology could reach. But quiet justice often begins as a new rule spoken in an ordinary room. The rule was this: no one would call Clara a cheat again. No one would say she worked a room. No one would refer to Daniel's final months as if she had stood between father and children for her own gain. Copies of the hospital note, pastor statement, visitor labels, and Daniel's letters would go into the estate folder. The originals would remain with Clara in the Bible, because Daniel had left the Bible to her. Major would stay with her. That part was said plainly after supper. Thomas brought it up first. Dad wrote that Major should remain with Clara as long as she can care for him. Paul started to answer, then stopped. "Fine." Clara looked at him. "Not fine. Say it properly." Paul took a breath. "Major stays with you." Clara nodded. "Thank you." Major, who had spent the entire day moving from person to person, as if measuring whether the house had become safe, finally climbed onto the rug beside Clara's chair and slept. Not the light sleep of a dog on duty. Real sleep. His paws twitched once. His gray muzzle rested near the Bible stand. A week later, Mr. Bell returned with copied statements and a preservation note. The note did not make Clara wealthy. It did not overturn Daniel's will. It did not punish the children or turn grief into a courtroom. It simply recorded that Daniel Whitcomb had left his Bible to Clara Whitcomb. That personal notes and supporting materials found with it identified her as his wife and caregiver. and that the family acknowledged her right to retain the Bible, Daniel's old wedding ring, the original personal notes, and Major's companionship. Clara signed her copy with a hand that shook only a little. Then Marlene asked if something could be added to the family Bible. Not a legal document, not a correction to the will, a line in the family record. Clara handed her the pen Daniel had kept in the drawer. Marlene wrote beneath Clara's marriage line. In careful blue ink, Clara stayed with Daniel through his final illness. As his wife, Thomas stood behind her. Paul looked away, but he did not object. Clara read the sentence twice. It did not make her a saint. It did not make the children villains. It made the record less false. On Sunday, they took Daniel's Bible to church. Not to display it, but because Pastor Glenn wanted to bless a new shelf in the small memorial room where families kept photographs and service programs. Ruth's photograph was copied and placed there beside Daniel's. Clara insisted on that. Then Marlene handed Pastor Glenn a small card with the new line from the family record. The pastor read it quietly, then placed it beneath Daniel's picture. Clara stayed with Daniel through his final illness. As his wife, no one applauded. No one gasped. A woman passing by paused, read the card, and touched Clara's sleeve. That is a good thing to have written down, she said. Clara thought of the hospital chair, the pill schedule, the nights of fear, Daniel's anger, Daniel's apology, Major sleeping by the door, and the Bible holding its secrets until the family needed them. She looked down at Major. He sat beside her, calm and tired, his shoulder against her leg. Yes, Clara said. It is. That evening, the Bible returned to the side table beside Clara's chair. Daniel's old ring rested inside the back cover. Wrapped in the chapel card, the recorder sat in the drawer, labeled and safe. Ruth's photograph remained in its proper place. Major slept on Daniel's robe with his paws loose and his ears soft. Clara turned off the lamp and sat for a moment in the dark. The house still held grief. It always would. But it no longer held the lie that she had stolen her place in it. Daniel had left her almost nothing the family could appraise. He had left her the Bible, and inside it, he had left enough truth for them to finally call her by the name she had already earned.